Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 creatures which you need for the island, so let's get into it. In at number 10 is the Daedon, and there is no doubt that this is one of the most useful creatures on the island, namely for its bossing abilities. Obviously this isn't going to be the creature which is going to defeat any kind of boss. It does not have the melee damage to do that, but if you level up this thing's food stat like absolute crazy, and then you can use this thing to heal up your dinosaurs in the boss fight, which is a very useful thing, and especially because there's no things like snarls on the island. Yes, you can transfer, but all the creatures on this list do natively spawn on the island, so don't expect any others. The Daedon is pretty much your only option out there, and its ability is just so good and it is so easy to use. The only real downside being the amount of meat it consumes, and you're going to need to really pump that hunger, but it actually isn't too bad and it is definitely worth it. In at number 9 is the Basilo, and this creature is pretty much your best bet for doing any kind of cave runs which you'll find out there. Obviously underwater ones, this thing is not a land creature, and I think there are 2 underwater caves on the island, one of the artifacts being used for the Megapithecus and one of them being used for the dragon. I'm pretty sure there's only 2, yeah, there's only 2 underwater caves, and the Basilosaurus is going to be extremely useful in all of those cases. It has the damage to deal some of a fight. Yes, it isn't going to stack up to the Mosasaur, but the fact that this thing is immune to electric eels and jellyfish and all those things makes this one of the most safe creatures to take into the ocean, as most of the threats are now just not even able to do their main abilities. The only thing you really have to take into mind is the fact that they have a depth limit, but as a nice little bonus, these things will also passively make oil. Next up, we have the Yutyrannus, and again, compared to the Daedon, the story is very similar. This is a great boss creature, which I think is highly essential for the island, and it is useful on all 3 of those boss fights, and it definitely is one which you'll want to use at some point 100%, as obviously this isn't going to deal the damage in the boss fight, although you could use UCs for that. That's not really their use case, and they're not going to heal up the creatures because that's the Daedon's job. This thing will buff up all of those creatures with its all famous Courage Roar, and courageous you can also be if you drop a quick sub on the channel. It is always greatly appreciated. But it also does have the Fear Roar as well, which isn't particularly useful for bosses due to the size limit on the Fear Roar, but if someone's trying to raid your base in PvP on a Pteranodon, then you can use the Fear Roar if you have a Yutyrannus on you, and they will have no chance in raiding you or scouting your base out whatsoever. Good PvP tip if you didn't know that already. In at number 7 is the Aloe, and this creature is a really great entry level carnivore on the island, and you may get somewhat angry with what I've put in the number 2 spot. If you know me already, you'll know what's in that spot, and you might want to put the Aloe in the number 2 spot, and the creature which is in number 2 in this spot, and that is totally fine. You can form your own opinions on these dinosaurs. This is just my take, as albeit the Aloe is an amazing creature, inflicting a great amount of bleed damage and having a very useful pack buff, it just isn't my go-to carnivore of choice, as it is a little bit too out of reach in terms of the level in some ways of when it is unlocked, as it is a much harder tame than the other one that is on this list, obviously. And also, I kind of don't like the size as much. I prefer those smaller carnivores. I just feel like I have a little bit more protection, and albeit the Aloe is much more powerful than the creature which shall not be named, which is obviously in the number 2 spot, the Aloe is just, I don't know, it's just not as appealing to me in a lot of ways. But I will definitely say that it is a truly amazing creature, which if you get the chance to on the island, which everyone realistically should, and especially on ASA, as they are so easy to tame with the new baby dino mechanic, you really can't miss out on taming a pack of Aloes. Remember, pack size is always 3, so if your pack aren't working, if you only have 2 Aloes, get a third one, and that pack buff will appear. Next up on the list we have the Rex, and this is pretty much your go-to boss creature which you can use on the island. Although in the honourable mentions section of this video there are a couple of other creatures which are great boss creatures, but which sadly didn't make it on my top 10, but they may have made it on yours. Either way, back to talking about the Rex, you can kind of tell why this is such a great boss creature. It is a big hunking carnivore with great big teeth and a lot of power, and compared to a lot of other carnivores, I feel like I'm saying a lot, just did say it twice in a sentence there, but either way, compared to other carnivores, this thing's health is actually way higher than loads of the other options, making it the ideal boss creature for you to go with, as it is just such a balanced creature. While yes, it isn't the carnivore which deals the most amount of damage on the island, which is still allowed into bosses. The Giga I'm not counting here, as the Giga is sort of in a different league as a carnivore, but in terms of things like the Spino, yes, it will deal more damage, but its health is a lot lower, so the Rex is usually the go-to, and the Rex is significantly easier to tame, and its saddle also doesn't require silica poles to craft, which can be a very big annoyance. Although at that stage of the game it isn't too much of a hindrance, it still can be a bit of one. In at number 5 is the Thyla, and there is a lot to say about the Thyla, and this creature is just so good at so many things, and it is actually one of the most versatile art creatures in my opinion. I've just done a top 10 on that recently, so if you go look on the channel you can see that top 10 if you're keen on it. And also in terms of the Thyla's abilities, and obviously apart from it just being versatile, this thing is a really great climber of all things. You saw it climb redwood trees there, but it can climb any kind of wall or vertical surface. Although meshing and meshes is a big glitch on ASA at the moment, so you can get yourself into some pretty sticky situations with terrain, and even fall through the terrain if you know that's your thing. But you know, ASA is still an early access game. They could have definitely worked on it a lot more though. But in terms of its other abilities as well, it isn't just a really great travel mount. Although it is a great use for it, it is also a really great carnivore, sadly not being allowed into boss fights. But I guess we have the Deinonychus on Valguero if you want a boss creature with kind of similar abilities to this, as that creature can also climb, but it is allowed into bosses, and in my opinion it is better than the Thyla, but that doesn't spawn on the island, so therefore it does not qualify for this list. But the main reason for its great attack is obviously that bleed ability which it has. Barely any other carnivores have this, which kind of doesn't make sense considering what they're doing and they're literally ripping right into a creature. You'd expect bleed damage to occur, but most carnivores don't even use that ability, and the fact that this has it is a huge bonus. Next up we have the Theri, and would it really be a list without the Theri here? This creature is just so useful for so many things, it had to be put on this list. The Freddy Krueger of Ark, with its saddle and locked at level 69.
Nice.
This thing really does pack a punch in all of its abilities, namely its fiber gathering, which barely any creatures can stack up to, although the Moss Chops is a great shout in the early game. Sadly it isn't on the list or in the honourable mentions, but you know, I guess it got a little mention here with the Theri. But also the Theri is great at gathering berries as well, and so with wood and thatch too. And it is a pretty good meat gatherer as well, as this thing really does pack a punch in terms of damage. And it is the go-to creature for doing the dragon boss fight, as that boss is very unfair to all kinds of carnivores, and it is really nice to have this creature as a backup. Although the only real downside is sweet vegetable cake is the only way that you can really heal these things up in a quick manner. But if you have a Daedon with you, that really shouldn't be too much of an issue. In at number 3 we have the Baryonyx. And would it really be a top 10 the Iron Creatures list without this thing appearing at some point? This is by far the best caving creature on the island, and there is no competition at all. No creature can stack up to this thing in all of its abilities. It is just so good at caving. It has to be put on this list for all of its greatness in every aspect of caving. It's the right size and it deals a heavy amount of damage with a reasonable health stat, great stamina and great weight to go with it too. There is nothing which could really be improved about with this creature. Maybe apart from it not eating normal meat instead of fish meat, and the fact that it spawns in the swamp isn't great. But I'm happy to take those as some side effects for a creature which is just this good. It is almost too good to be true. And it also does have a right click attack in the water which can stun creatures up to the size of a megalodon. And it is a very viable solution if you don't have a Basilosaurus for the underwater caves on the island. And this is the creature which I said when I was talking about the aloe. You may be a little bit upset at this being in the number 2 spot, but I absolutely adore the Carno in so many ways. It has to be put on the number 2 slot for me. The also amount of nostalgia I get from this creature is insane, and it has the bleed ability too, and although it doesn't have the pack buff, it is a much more manageable size, and also it is a very nice carnivore to control as well. Albeit the aloe has a nice turning circle and all of that, but the Carno really just feels much nicer to control, and in my opinion it is just a better designed creature. And also with its comedically small arms, you have something to laugh about with this thing too, and it just has so much character around it. And again, its saddle level being in the 40s or 50s, I can't remember. It's one of those. It's very achievable for any Ark player really if you just put a little bit of effort into the game. It is a really great carnivore in the early stages of obviously mid stages as well. And you don't even need the saddle to fully utilize this creature. You can just have it following you around on adventures until you get that saddle, and you could be leveling up along the way to get it ready for when you first ride it. A very good strategy actually, considering that trank arrows unlock at level 21, and from there it is really easy to make a basic wooden trap and just trank this thing out. You really cannot go wrong with the Carno. But before we get into number 1, I have a few quick honourable mentions. And finally, in at number 1, we have the RG. And really, what did you expect? This thing is an absolute beast of a creature which really does deserve to be respected. And it is a go-to on all maps except Arboration and Gen 1, as obviously flyers aren't allowed on those maps. But on all other maps, you need an RG really. These creatures are just that useful. They are the pinnacle of metal resource gathering, and when paired with something like an Anki or a Dodic, which I'm kind of going to tie into the number 1 spots here, as they really work well together as creatures, you have yourself pretty much the best harvesting creature combination which you could possibly have. The RG has weight reduction on things like metal, crystal, obsidian, and much more, and paired with something like the Anki, which can gather insane amounts of metal, it really is set up for success. And the RG deals a reasonable amount of damage as well, has a great weight stat and a great stamina stat, which is actually why the stamina didn't even make the top 10 list, as usually I'll just go straight to the RG, and albeit the Pteranodon is a good tame which is great for beginners and very beginner friendly, I always just go straight for the RG and don't even bother with the Pteranodon. And on top of that as well, its saddle acts as a portable smithy, which is a nice thing if one of your metal weapons breaks out on your travels, or your flak armor in cave runs, and also it has a nice little neat regen buff if you eat a dead corpse. This creature is amazing. In at number 10, we have got the Uteranus, and although this creature is just viewed as a creature which is going to buff all of your creatures in a boss fight, don't know why I said creature that many times in a sentence,
But either way, this thing is obviously mainly used to buff creatures in a boss fight with its courage roar, but it also just works as a pretty decent carnivorous mount, and you can actually do bosses with this dinosaur, which most people probably wouldn't consider doing, and maybe it's not the best option. If you go to something like a Rex, you probably have a higher success rate, but you could definitely do it with something like the UT, and you can have a pretty decent success rate nonetheless. And actually using a UT in some cases can be a lot better than the Rex, because they're much more mobile creatures and you may just like them more, and if you breed them and you get some really good ones, they can be really good for that use. They're just general great meat harvesters and hide harvesters as well, because they kill loads of creatures. And obviously you can use their fear roar as well, not really in boss scenarios, but you can kind of use them as a sort of turret thing, that like if someone's coming to raid your base on a Pteranodon, you can always just fear roar those things away is what I meant to say, and then from that you can essentially disable them from raiding you, which is actually a pretty decent strat if you've never tried it. Next up, we have got the Basilo, and this creature can actually make oil in its inventory, which is actually a pretty useful thing. And you know, you might just use this thing as a caving creature, but it is also a pretty good creature for exploring just the general ocean biome, which is actually quite an integral part of the game in some ways, as obviously it's ocean caving, but also for a lot of resources you need to explore, you know, get loads of oil and silica pearls and black pearls and all of that. And I know they do have a depth limit, but still that doesn't really hinder them. And again, they are immune to jellyfish and electric eels. I say it a lot on the channel, and that is something huge about these creatures. And they also do have an X variant, so there's an even better version of these creatures out there, and they can also make little rainbows as well when they jump out of the water, which is actually quite cute. I know it doesn't really affect their abilities and their uses, but you know, just a nice cool feature which might brighten up your day. Next up, we have got the Theory, and this creature has to be here as it is just so good at gathering all kinds of resources, which obviously makes it a very versatile creature in all kinds of anything really, and especially that fiber gathering, as fiber is one of the most essential resources in the game, and you'll pretty much struggle to find a better creature than a Theory which can actually gather fiber. And obviously you can use a sickle, or you can use a moss chop, so that's another great creature for you to use for this. The Theory just does it better, and it's pretty easy and accessible to tame. You just have to be level 69.
Nice.
That joke gets me every single time, but you know, it's actually pretty hard to find a really decent fiber gatherer, and this is a really decent fiber gatherer, but obviously it can gather all kinds of berries, wood, thatch, and all of that. And it's also pretty decent for the dragon boss fight because it's a herbivore, so it doesn't get affected by the dragon's fire attack, which is particularly lethal to carnivores and not very friendly to them whatsoever. So you know, that's where the benefit of this comes in. But sadly, you can't just use meat to heal them. You have to use something like sweet vegetable cake, and that is frankly quite expensive, so that is a downside. But apart from that, they really are great creatures. In at number 7, we have got the Baryonyx, and this creature is just so good at caving, but it is also great at several other things as well. But the caving just make it inherently versatile in itself, because being able to do caves and all kinds of caves and travel around many situations in caves is inherently versatile, and obviously it's a really great underwater mount as well, so that is again another really great use for this creature. And they do obviously have that spin attack, so they can stun creatures up to the size of a megalodon, which does play huge benefit in their ability. And if you do have one of those things, I definitely recommend you getting one of these things into the water, not just using it predominantly as a land creature, although you probably will predominantly use it as a land creature. Get it in the water and you get its feet wet and actually use it in the water, and you'll probably find that you really like this creature in that environment as well. Yeah, maybe it doesn't have the greatest amount of speed like some of the newer creatures out there, but considering it spawns on the island, you really can't go wrong with this creature. So that is why I put the Barry in at the number 7 spot, and you can see there that Megalodon is just completely frozen. So if you're in a pinch and need to get out of a sticky situation, you can always do it with the Barry. Next up, we have got the Rhinoganatha. Personally, I don't really like this creature because I find it's a little bit too overpowering in what it can do, but I know loads of you out there really like this creature, and I'm not going to diss it for its versatility, even though it's not a favourite of mine, so I am going to put it on this list, although you might not quite agree with my next choice, which is my preferred option, and I will say it, albeit this is the kind of better creature in my opinion. It's just I don't enjoy using it, which is why I put it lower on the list. But still, this creature is full of very exciting opportunities. This thing can pick up creatures up to the size of a Rex, and can pick up Parasaurs, pick up all kinds of really big creatures, which is inherently a really great use in its own thing. Cryos do exist though, not on ASA at the moment, so it's the only way of really getting those big creatures around. But on normal up, you can make do with cryos, and you'll definitely have loads of them by the time you get the saddle for this thing, or even attempt to tame one, because it is quite a difficult, lengthy process. Pretty much just a rip-off of the Reaper Tame, but you know, it is the same game publishers and same game makers, so you can't really call it a rip-off, let's say, because I just said that earlier. You kind of maybe call it a rehashing. It's a little bit different, of course, because the way you get 100% effectiveness is with all of those resources which are just on screen there, and if you feel like it's too unnecessary to read all of those, then it's probably too unnecessary to get all of those to actually get 100% effectiveness. And you're not bringing this thing to a boss fight. Don't really think that is very useful or worth your time. I just recommend saving the highest level when you can, and you don't need that 100% effectiveness. It's fine, you can just wait it out and you'll be good. But if you really are a perfectionist, obviously I'm not going to stop you from doing that. Also, these creatures are really great at raiding bases. Like, they deal a heck of a lot of damage. They're really quick flyers, they have a lot of carry weight, so you can transport a lot of metal around with them, and they are just inherently really big, beefy creatures, but not as big as maybe you would expect. Obviously these things don't have a platform saddle like the Quetzal, so that still does have a slight gain over this thing, but it is a really versatile creature. Although personally I don't really like it, and kind of what it is, the creature, I think it's too overpowering. I'll still admit it's a very versatile creature. Now in at number 5 we've got the Argy, and this creature just had to be here for me above the Rhino Ganasta, because I think it's a superior creature. It fits into the game more, and I really like its regen ability, the fact that its saddle acts as portable smithy, and it really seems to fit into the game, and it's a pretty easy tame as well. Not saying that the Rhino Ganasta tame being really difficult like devalues it as a creature. No, it's a much higher level, so you would expect a harder tame method, but still I think again that does kind of make the RG a lot more accessible. Albeit yes, the RG can't pick up anything like Rexes and all of that. I think that is personally a little bit stupid. I should really stop ranting on about the Rhino Ganasta, because I know those of you out there really like it, so I'm going to stop that, and I'm just going to talk about the RG, because I don't really think I should be dissing your opinions, although I should express mine. I think I've done it enough, haven't I? Either way, the RG can pick up a wealth of creatures. Obviously it does have that regen buff when it kills a dead thing. Well, it's alive and then it kills it, and then it's dead, and then it eats the dead thing, and then it gets the regen buff. And then it has obviously a portable smithy as its saddle, which is useful because this thing's it's got really great weight stats, so you can get around really quickly and easily just in the general area, and then from that you can take loads of metal to and fro wherever you're going, and yeah, that does play a huge benefit in your advantage. So the RG in at number 5. Next up we have got the Shadowmane, and this is just one of those creatures where it's so densely packed with abilities it kind of has to make the list, or this list just really isn't right. The Shadowmane has the hydration buff. The Shadowmane can really jump to insane heights that no flyer is safe, and also on top of that it does have the pack buff. It can go invisible, and it's a really great swimmer. It's just really mobile. Again, can jump extremely high into the air. It can also charge up its damage as well, doing even more. It's just such a great boss creature, and just great for general travel, mobility, general combat, PvP scenarios, PvE scenarios, you name it, this thing is really good for it. The only real downside is the lack of armor from a saddle, but they have natural armor, so I guess that kind of accounts for it. It's not quite as bad as a Wyvern, where they just have absolutely nothing at all. And as you can see there, it's so good underwater, and actually quite a lot of people demote it for that and they just use it for combat, but it's a pretty good underwater caving creature too, and somewhat of a baryonyx replacement, although I tend to prefer the baryonyx just a little bit for those scenarios. At number 3 we have got the Desmodus Draculae, and this thing is it's one of those creatures where maybe it doesn't have the most amount of abilities, let's say. Obviously it does have the guiding ability, and it can farm blood bags, but it has really unique abilities that makes it so versatile. And obviously that sanguine elixir allows for creatures to be tamed so easily, as 30% of it is done right there with just a click of a button. And the blood bag farming is invaluable really, because you know, the blood bags were just such a pain to get before this creature came out. Obviously it's tamed with blood bag, so you still need to do that quite lengthy process to get your first one, but just get a really low level one for your first one, get the lowest you can, and then use that to farm loads of blood bags, and then get the highest level that you can. That's my recommended strat anyway. For the Desmodus, these things can also go invisible at night time as well, but stupidly I was in the Wastelands biome and it never goes nighttime there, and you can't really change that, so that's good for me choosing the perfect biome for this creature. In number 2, we've got the Bloodstalker, and this creature, I feel like people diss it for what I really use it for, and maybe some people will think, well, the Shadowman and Desmodus are more versatile. This is just a travel mount, you know, and you can't really use it for bosses and all of that. And albeit, yes, you can't, but it is a really exceptional underwater mount, which is why I put it here. And it's actually my favourite underwater mount, with no questions whatsoever. Sorry about the yawning there. It's quite late in the evening as I'm recording this. But yeah, these things are my absolute favourite underwater creatures, no questions asked. They're so quick, they're so easy to take in the water, they can skim over the top of the water, which the Shadowman can't do. I know the Maywing can, but the Maywing's not on this list because it's only really great for travelling. And yes, that thing with all its breeding abilities essentially acting as a portable feeding trough, and it can carry babies around the place. Yeah, it's useful for that and versatile for that, but personally I think all the creatures on this list do excel a little bit further than that. That's just kind of maybe genuinely what you would expect, just 2 abilities at a minimum. But yeah, this creature, you can gather loads of hexagons with it on Gen 1. I know that point's probably going to come back to bite me actually with the Maywing when you look at some of these other creatures on the list, but I just don't really think the Maywings should be on the list. But I guess it got an honourable mention spot here, you could say. But either way, these things are capable of getting loads of hexagons on Gen 1. They're really fast travelling creatures, of course. They're really great underwater, really quick. Obviously you tame them with blood bags, so easy to get with the Desmodus. You might as well just do that and then tame yourself a really high level Bloodstalker, because it will be saving you the most time, unless you're just using creatures on Gen 1 or Gen 2, whatever map you're taming this thing on, if you want to go the more authentic route. And finally, in at number 1, we have got the Deinonychus, and this creature can deal bleed damage to bosses, which inherently makes it really versatile for every boss, apart from the bosses on Extinction, of course, because of that bleed ability. It's just so useful for getting all of that done, and its abilities are quite versatile as well. It's a really great travel mount. This thing does take no full damage whatsoever, which is a pretty rare occurrence on any kind of dinosaur, so it's nice to see. And the fact that it can latch onto creatures and just rip them to shreds with that bleed ability truly is a sight to be seen. And again, to my knowledge, no other creature can do this, and no one has seemed to have questioned me on it over the however long I've been doing top 10s, months and months now. It's coming up to maybe a year at this point. I don't know. No one has questioned me on this, so I'm pretty sure, I'm perfectly confident that it is true. Let's say 99%. These things also do have a pack buff as well, which again is going to boost them in those boss scenarios, and they have a heck of a lot of mobility on top of just them not being able to take full damage. Because, you know, would you rather have the small Titanosaur that can get around everywhere, or the big Titanosaur that just can't take full damage? You're probably going to go for the smaller agile one, because I don't know why I use a Titanosaur there, but either way, yeah, this thing could parkour up walls. You know, that's actually quite useful. Maybe not as elegant as a solution as the Thyla, because those things can just kind of walk up them, run up them as you wish, but it does the same thing. It just in some ways is a little bit more janky, but you get used to it, and actually after a while it kind of ends up being a little bit better. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and as always, comment down below what is the most versatile Arc Tame, as I want to know your thoughts. And also, do you agree with this list? If not, comment down your top 10 or just your most favourite versatile creature, and I'll see you later.